Marijuana is still a controversial topic in the United States. Arguments range from is it a dangerous drug or a benign plant with medical benefits? Should it remain largely illegal or should it become legalized, sold, and taxed? Here in California, citizens are waiting to vote in 2016 on upcoming marijuana legislation. I support a group of anti-marijuana activists who fear serious social and individual harms are in store if recreational use of marijuana is passed. These activists are on a mission to inform voters about the downside of legalizing marijuana. I'm a law enforcement officer who has worked to address drug trafficking. I've interviewed hundreds of subjects associated with the use, distribution, and sale of narcotics. All I ever saw was destruction from marijuana and other drugs. Marijuana is a devastating agent, now disguised as medicine, and we can't let this modern rebranding of marijuana win today. When our leaders send mixed messages to kids about marijuana, well, that's the real crime in America. Some top leaders take a relaxed position on marijuana, and yet in sharp contrast, the DEA is telling the hard truth about marijuana. In a 2014 publication titled Dangers and Consequences of Marijuana Abuse, the following is included regarding one of the studies on marijuana use. Quote, compared with those who had never used cannabis, young adults who had 6 or more years since first use of cannabis were twice as likely to develop a non-affective psychosis such as schizophrenia, end quote. And it goes on to say, quote, they were also 4 times as likely to have high scores in clinical tests of delusion. Marijuana is harming our population. Now, here's a more in-depth conversation on the subject with Mark Dell and Dr. Lynn Fox. Thank you for watching.
Yes. Hi, I'm Mark Dale with Families for Safer Schools, and we're here with Dr. Lynn Fox.
And as he said, I'm Dr. Lynn Fox. I've been in the field for over 30 years and started out in Southern California and then moved to Northern California. Set up 3 model programs for the federal government that were implemented in Southern California, and I continue to learn and deal with this problem. Unfortunately, it's not gotten better. It got better for a while, and then everything fell apart, and with the marijuana issues today and this medical marijuana acceptance, we're in a lot of trouble with our youth, and that's why we're here today, right?
Well, Dr. Fox, part of the problem that we have coming up is the recreational use of marijuana is being considered for 2016 in the vote. What's your take on that, and what's your concerns?
Well, once again, I'm very concerned about adolescents and our youth, so I come from that perspective. Although I think it's a bad idea for everyone. I think the drug of today is so potent compared to the past that everyone that is using it should be thinking about the ramifications from a medical perspective, really. I mean, I don't understand why you would want to use a drug that affects the immune system when you already have cancer or some other illness. And also that there are medications out there that have been approved by FDA. But I'm not going down that path right now. My expertise is an adolescent development specialist. I train teachers and have for 35 years. I've worked with kids in elementary school, regular education, special education, K through 12, and have been teaching teachers for 25 years. I was a professor at San Francisco State and San Diego State. So I'll stick with what I know best. And my huge concern is about the effects of marijuana, especially the potency today, on a developing mind, a developing body, an individual who is just learning how to be social and to interact in the world, an individual who psychologically still has a lot of things to deal with. Adolescence is a very difficult time, and how to do it in such a way that they mature versus destroy brain cells and abilities that they normally would have, but if they ingest the drugs. So I also do a lot in the area of looking at the brain and the effect on learning and maturity.
So, in the world of teen culture, you have dabs, wax, vapes, and the edibles. As a specialist on brain development with adolescents, can you talk a little bit about the risk-taking behaviors that teenagers may do and why they get attracted to this?
Well, first, I want to talk a little bit about the brain because during adolescence is the most important time in terms of the development. And there's a couple of things I think are really important and help you understand this. First of all, the brain does not fully develop till about 25 years of age. So you're not just getting through high school, you got to get them through college. And marijuana creates a very scary situation because one of the most horrible effects, in my opinion, is that it affects the frontal lobe. And what does that mean? That means that their decision making becomes very poor, their problem solving is very poor, and it affects their ability in other ways to learn and take in the information, to focus, to be engaged. One of the things that in the past they talked a lot about and the effects of drugs, and when a young person starts using at an early age, it's called amotivational syndrome, meaning they don't have the motivation to stick with the classroom and learning, being focused, continue being on the sports team or being engaged. They become totally focused on the drug and getting that high. So that concerns me greatly, and it's something I think people need to really pay attention to. Because the problem is once they lose this important time in their life and they are engaged in the drug and that drug culture that kind of has become culturized and trendized by this medical marijuana. Well, it's medical, so it's not going to really hurt me, versus this is a drug and it is a potent drug, and depending on how you're ingesting it, whether you're smoking it or you're eating it as an edible or you're vaping it, you know, with these masks and all that kind of stuff, you're looking at extreme potency. And what happens is, remember, this mind isn't developed yet. So the things from a psychological perspective, they're much more vulnerable to things like schizophrenia, paranoia, psychosis. And so you have to look at the whole picture. And the problem is adolescents want to belong. And they'll belong with whatever group accepts them. And one of the things is when you start going down the path with the drug use, and especially with marijuana, then you start hanging around with those kids. You start changing the kids you're working with. Your grades start going down. And you know what's really bad is that most parents don't even realize until a year or two that their kids are involved with the use of the drug.
Inception point is something I've always been very interested in. And a lot of people in the health profession sometimes put down the term gateway. So can you address gateway a little bit and what that's about?
Well, I have probably worked with, I don't know, I know over 250,000 people. I've trained all over the United States in 35 years. But, and I've been in high schools everywhere. I've, you know, had a stepson and my nephew who was just here, watched his development and really educated them a lot on drugs and not to do it. I can't say that they never experimented, but it was short and hopefully not that good, and then they got it away from it because they're both strong young men. But what happens is they start very young. As a matter of fact, about 7% of our seventh graders are addicted to either alcohol and or marijuana. And so I want to go back to gateway drugs because that's what you're talking about, because I believe it is a thing of the present. How do they use marijuana? Most of them smoke it to start. And usually they can get cigarettes first. So they get used to this half-life of nicotine. And this becomes a behavior. And they got to have it in the morning and the afternoon. And so it becomes their choice. And it's comfortable for them to go on. And they usually start there. They don't start with these higher levels of potency. So it is a gateway drug. Same with alcohol and the same with cigarettes. You ask anyone that uses another drug that we consider more potent, which it isn't. That's another misconception, is marijuana, there are forms of it, like you were just saying, that are so potent, they're more addicting than heroin and many of these other drugs. So it's not a benign substance they're putting in their body.
So when you look at the world of schools, middle school, high school, and college, especially middle school and high school, a lot of administrators don't necessarily know how to tackle this. Right. What would you advise? What's your thoughts along that area?
Well, in the past, back in the 80s, we had drug-free school policies and programs in every single school. That was one of the good things of Ronald Reagan's era, whether you're for him or not for him. He spent billions of dollars, and every single school in the United States had to have a program and a policy. So every teacher had to be educated, the psychologists were educated, the administrators were educated, and the parents were educated whenever they could. Okay, so that was wonderful, because what happened is the drug use went down, and you had people working as a team to tackle the problem and to deal with difficult issues. Today, and I'm very current and very involved in the schools. As you know, I write a lot of textbooks and materials, and so I do trainings out in the field. Most of the people from administrators down, they know little or nothing about marijuana or any other drugs, and they are so concerned about core curriculum and all of that, they're focused only on the academic. And you have to realize with some of these drugs, and especially when they're using higher potency marijuana, they drop out of school. So they don't have to deal with them in the school. And in a way, they're kind of, I hate to say this, but when you have a kid that's so many problems and doesn't show up and is belligerent and all those behaviors that are so difficult to live with, if you're a parent, you know what I'm talking about, is it's hard to run a school, and it's hard to keep up your grade points for the whole school, and today's schools are evaluated on that. So, and if there's no money, that's the other part of it. There's no money or resources. Back in the 80s, there were billions of dollars. Today, there's little or none.
Right, right. It's funny, you mentioned the Reagans and the just say no concept. It's elegantly simple.
It is. And it worked. And people want to foo-foo it, but do you know why it became the just say no and why she did it? Because Nancy Reagan was out in the schools, and she was really into this, and is to this day. She asked the kids, she said, what should we do? What should we say? What should our Logan be? And this little boy stood up and, just as proud as anything, said, keep it simple. Just say no. And that's how it came about. But I was back there. See, today all these people can talk about it. You have to realize, once the Reagan era was over, and because it was so successful, politically a new party came in. They want to support their own things, and drugs were not it. It also was in a good place at that point in time, but there was no maintenance, shall we say. The monies were taken away, and then the drugs got stronger, and you see where we are today. And I think we're in the worst situation we've ever been in our country.